George deliberately postponed all his company meetings an hour early to attend his son Ned's first parent-teacher meeting for elementary school. He sat in the third row of the classroom, by a window seat, surrounded by well-dressed young mothers. As a tall man among them, he looked somewhat out of place, drawing quite a few curious glances. George didn't mind. He just wearily rubbed his brow. For the past 5 years, he had been both father and mother alone, raising his helpless son and pulling his near-bankrupt company out of the mire. Only he knew the hardships involved. Now, seeing his son finally carrying a small backpack, he felt it was all worth it. The noise in the classroom gradually quieted down with the crisp sound of high heels. George looked up and glanced toward the podium. A slender woman in a light blue dress walked up, holding a stack of materials. She wore light makeup, her long hair tied into a gentle bun at the back of her head, and the corners of her mouth carried a faint, perfectly measured smile. "Good afternoon, parents." Her voice was clear and gentle, like a stream flowing through the mountains. "I am the homeroom teacher for Ned, Leo, and 10 other children. My name is Mary, but you can all call me Teacher Mary." She smiled, picked up the chalk, turned around, and wrote her name on the blackboard. Stroke by stroke, smooth and flowing. Mary. When those 2 words appeared clearly on the blackboard, George felt as if all the blood in his body instantly froze with a loud boom. He felt as if struck by a bolt of lightning from head to toe, his entire body stiffening in his seat, unable to move. Was he blind? Or had the world gone mad? He stared intently at the woman on the podium. Her face, compared to 5 years ago, had lost some of its youthful awkwardness and gained a sense of calm and gentleness. But those familiar brows and eyes, the slight upward curve at the corners of her mouth when she smiled, the habit of her pinky finger unconsciously curling up when holding the chalk. It's her. It's definitely her. He would recognize her even if she turned to ashes. Mary. The woman who, when his company went bankrupt and his father was seriously ill in the hospital needing surgery, took the last $300,000 in betrothal money their family had scraped together, vanished overnight, and has been out of contact ever since. His runaway bride ex-wife. For 5 years, this name has been the most painful nightmare in his midnight dreams, a festering, unhealable scar on his heart. He once searched for her like a madman, not to win her back, but to ask face to face, why? But she, like a drop of water merging into the ocean, vanished without a trace. He thought that in this lifetime, they would never see each other again. But he never dreamed that 5 years later, they would unexpectedly reunite in such an absurd and extreme way. She actually became his son's elementary school homeroom teacher. George felt as if an invisible hand was gripping his heart tightly, causing him so much pain that he could hardly breathe. He watched her at the podium, gently and softly explaining the teaching plan, talking about how to cultivate good habits in children. That image of a role model, gentle and responsible, was the greatest irony in his eyes. What right did she have to stand here and educate other people's children? What right does a woman who took away life-saving money and betrayed mercilessly at someone else's most critical moment have to talk about morality and responsibility? A surge of anger mixed with boundless hatred and absurdity shot from George's chest straight to the crown of his head. He almost lost control, ready to stand up on the spot, rush to the podium, and tear off her hypocritical mask in front of all the parents. But he couldn't. He clenched his fists tightly, his nails digging deep into his flesh, using the pain to maintain the last shred of his sanity. Because he is Ned's father. He can't ruin his son's homeroom teacher on the very first day of school. George just sat there, staring fixedly at the woman on the podium with an icy, piercing gaze that seemed to bore right through her. A woman he once loved to the core and now hated to the bone. And Mary on the podium seemed to have sensed that overly intense gaze. Her gaze slowly swept across the classroom. Finally, it met George's blood-red eyes in the air, without any warning. Her smile instantly froze on her face the moment she saw him. The color in Mary's face quickly faded at a visible speed, becoming as pale as the chalk in her hand. Her hand trembled ever so slightly, but it was only for that brief moment. The next second, she casually looked away, as if what she had just seen was nothing more than an insignificant stranger. She continued explaining the content on the PPT in her gentle, steady tone, without the slightest pause. That calm composure, that unruffled demeanor, to George, was the ultimate provocation. What right does she have? What right does she have to be so at ease with herself? Could it be that the 300,000, that life lost, that betrayal, really mean as little to her as dust shaken off a piece of clothing? George felt as if his lungs were about to be burned through by his fury. The next hour was nothing short of torture for George. Every word Mary spoke felt like a needle piercing his nerves. Every smile on her face was like a knife repeatedly cutting into his heart. He couldn't make out what she was saying at all. In his mind, there was only one thought screaming wildly. Grab her, question her, tear her apart. Finally, after enduring this long, century-like parent meeting, Mary smiled and announced, "That concludes today's parent meeting. Thank you all for coming. If there are any individual questions, we can discuss them privately." The parents gradually stood up, gathering in small groups around the podium, hoping to exchange a few more words with the homeroom teacher, who looked both beautiful and responsible. George did not move. He just sat there, like a patient leopard lurking in the shadows, locking his cold gaze onto his prey. He waited, waiting for the crowd to disperse, waiting for the moment of judgment to arrive. Mary smiled as she dealt with the enthusiastic parents, while constantly glancing with the corner of her eye at the man sitting in the corner, exuding a terrifying aura. She knew he wouldn't leave. She knew that this day, which she had avoided for 5 years, had finally come. After the last parent left satisfied, the empty classroom was left with only the two of them. The air seemed to be instantly sucked into a vacuum. It was so oppressive that it was hard to breathe. George slowly stood up and walked step by step toward the podium. His figure was tall and upright. 5 years of honing in the business world had long since erased the youthful naivety he once had, replaced instead by a calm and overwhelmingly imposing aura. He walked up to her and stopped, looking down at her from above. "Mary," he spoke, his voice hoarse, as if each word was squeezed out from between his teeth. "Long time no see." Mary kept her head down, her hands unconsciously clutching the hem of her clothes. She dared not look into his eyes. She was afraid of seeing the hatred there that could burn her to ashes. "You?" She took a deep breath, seeming to want to say something, but didn't know where to start. "What did I say?" George sneered coldly, his laughter filled with endless mockery. "You want to ask if I've been doing well these past 5 years?" He leaned down, close to her ear, whispering in a devilish tone that only the two of them could hear, speaking each word deliberately. "Thanks to you, I haven't been doing well at all. My dad passed away on the 3rd day after you disappeared with that surgery money. The company went bankrupt. I was alone, carrying over 10 million in debt, with a baby who needed constant care, and I almost jumped into the river. So can you tell me now, Mary?" His voice suddenly rose, filled with uncontrollable anger. "That 300,000, did you spend it happily?" Mary's body trembled violently. She suddenly lifted her head, her eyes instantly reddening, her lips trembling, but she couldn't utter a single word. At that moment, a small head peeked out at the classroom door. "Dad," it was Ned. School was over, and seeing that Dad hadn't come out yet, he came looking for him on his own. George felt a chill in his heart and instantly suppressed all his anger. He stood up straight and stood in front of Mary, not wanting his son to see her on the verge of tears. "Ned, how did you come here by yourself?" He tried to make his voice sound as normal as usual. "Dad, I've been waiting for you for so long." Ned, carrying a small backpack, ran in with quick steps. He immediately spotted Mary by the podium and broke into a bright smile. "Hello, Teacher Mary." He lifted his head, his voice clear and loud. Mary looked at the little boy in front of her, who was almost a carbon copy of George, and a complex mix of emotions flashed in her eyes. There was shock, sadness, pain, and a hint of, even she hadn't noticed it herself, a gentle longing. She crouched down, struggling to force out a smile more awkward than crying. "Hello, Ned." Her voice trembled uncontrollably. George's heart was pierced sharply. He looked at the scene before him, feeling incredibly absurd and ironic. His son was sweetly greeting the woman he hated most in his life, saying, "Hello, teacher." And this woman, the one who had ruined half of his life, was now looking at his weakness with a kind of sad gaze he couldn't understand. George pulled Ned behind him, adopting a protective stance to separate him from Mary. "Teacher Mary," he looked at her, his eyes cold, his tone an unhidden warning. "From now on, stay away from my son." After saying that, he didn't look at her again, took Ned's hand, turned around, and strode away, leaving Mary alone, crouching on the spot, finally breaking down in tears in the empty classroom. On the way home, George remained silent, the atmosphere in the car oppressively tense. Ned sat in the child's safety seat, swinging his little legs, completely unaware of his father's nearly exploding emotions. "Dad, Teacher Mary is really pretty, like a fairy sister from TV." George's hands gripping the steering wheel tightened suddenly, veins bulging on the back of his hands. Dad, Teacher Mary even praised me today, saying my drawing was the best. Dad, when Teacher Mary smiles, her eyes curve like the moon. With every word Ned spoke, the fire burning in George's heart grew even stronger. He slammed on the brakes, stopping the car by the roadside. Ned! He turned around and, for the first time, shouted at his son in an extremely stern tone. Don't ever mention her again. Ned was startled by him. His small mouth pouted, and his eyes instantly turned red. The aggrieved tears welled up, but he didn't dare to let them fall. George looked at his son's tearful expression. His heart ached, and he instantly regretted it. In these 5 years, he had never spoken harshly to his son. He was his only support. How could he take out his hatred for that woman on an innocent child? He took a deep breath, softened his tone, and reached out to wipe the tears from the corner of his son's eyes. I'm sorry, Ned. It's Dad's fault. Dad shouldn't have lost his temper with you. His voice was hoarse. But you have to remember, that Teacher Mary is not a good person. Stay away from her at school from now on, okay? What? Ned blinked his big eyes in confusion. But I think Teacher Mary is very nice. George opened his mouth, but didn't know how to explain to a 5-year-old child the dirty and complicated adult world of betrayal, money, and death. He could only wearily start the car again. Back home, George locked himself in the study and lit a cigarette. The taste of nicotine brought a slight calm to his chaotic, restless nerves. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and the unbearable memories from 5 years ago surged in like a tide. 5 years ago, George was a confident and ambitious second-generation rich kid. His family's company was thriving in the industry. He and Mary were the golden couple admired by everyone at university. He loved her openly and passionately, proposing right after graduation, eager to announce to the world that this woman was his. He gave her a grand engagement party and a dowry of $300,000. He said, Mary, when we get married, I will give you the most dreamy wedding. But unforeseen storms arise. Just as they were preparing for the wedding, his father was diagnosed with acute leukemia during a medical checkup. He needed an immediate bone marrow transplant, and the surgery fees, along with subsequent treatment, were a bottomless pit. Misfortunes never come singly. The company's competitor, taking advantage of his father's illness, colluded both inside and outside, undermining the foundation, and used despicable means to steal the company's core secrets, causing the company's cash flow to instantly break, and overnight, it was on the brink of bankruptcy. The whole sky seemed to collapse. George sold his car, sold his house, and begged people everywhere to borrow money, barely managing to gather the initial treatment fees. He was overwhelmed, running back and forth between the hospital and the company every day, losing a lot of weight. During that time, Mary stayed by his side. She held his hand and gently said to him, George, don't be afraid. Everything will get better. I will always be with you. He believed it. He thought she was the only light in that boundless darkness, until his father's condition worsened, urgently needing the prepared surgery fee. He returned home, intending to discuss with Mary about taking out the $300,000 betrothal money to cover the emergency. But what awaited him was an empty apartment and a cold note placed on the table. On the note, there was only one sentence. George, I'm sorry, I don't want to live like this. Let's end it here. Her bank card had long been closed. Her phone number had become inactive. She, along with the $300,000, had vanished without a trace. George would never forget the despair he felt when he returned to the hospital empty-handed, and the doctor shook his head saying, We have done all we can. He didn't even get to see his father one last time. From that moment on, the name Mary became the most venomous curse in his life. The cigarette burned down to the end, scorching his fingers. George suddenly woke up with a start and forcefully crushed the cigarette, but in the ashtray. He couldn't let this woman ruin his life again. He picked up his phone and dialed a friend's number. Help me look someone up. Mary. Everything about her in the past 5 years. I want to know it all. After hanging up the phone, George walked to the window, looking out at the countless city lights, his gaze cold and resolute. Mary, you better pray that you haven't left any dirt on yourself in these 5 years. Otherwise, I will make sure you understand what it means to be worse off than dead. Just as George vowed to take revenge. At the other end of the city, in an old, cramped rental room, Mary was sitting at her desk under the dim light of a desk lamp, grading the homework of the children in her class. When she reached Ned's homework book, her hand paused. She looked at the notebook, at the childish handwriting, and the smiling sun drawn beside it. Tears, without any warning, fell drop by drop onto the homework book, spreading a small patch of water stains. She took out from the deepest part of the drawer a small longevity lock, worn and slightly faded from being rubbed. On the back of the lock, a single character was engraved. Nyang, Nien. She pressed the longevity lock tightly against her chest, as if it were the only warmth she had in this world. Ned. She whispered this name she had hidden and cherished for 5 years, silently, over and over again into the air. Mom, I'm sorry. Early the next morning, George took Ned to school. When the car reached the school gate, Ned unbuckled his seatbelt but didn't get out immediately. He turned his head to look at George, his young face showing a seriousness beyond his years. Dad, did you have an argument with Teacher Mary yesterday? George's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected the child to be so perceptive. No, he denied vehemently. You're lying. Ned's little mouth pouted. When you came back yesterday, your eyes were red, just like when I want to cry. And you also wouldn't let me mention Teacher Mary. George was silent. Dad. Ned tugged at the corner of his shirt and whispered. Could you please not dislike Teacher Mary? Why? Because I like Teacher Mary. Ned's voice carried a hint of pleading. Teacher Mary looks at me so gently, just like how Grandma used to look at me. George's heart felt as if it had been sharply stabbed by something. His mother had passed away from overwork-related illness in the 2nd year after Ned was born. Ned's memories of Grandma were almost non-existent. What he spoke of was merely an imagination pieced together from photos and George's descriptions. Yet, from Mary's gaze, he felt that long-missing tenderness from a female elder. George suddenly felt that he was a failure. He thought he had given his son everything, but in the end, what he couldn't provide was easily made up for by the woman he hated the most. What else could he do? Could he rush to the school, expose Mary's past in front of everyone, and then forcefully arrange for Ned to transfer? He couldn't do it. He couldn't be that selfish. He couldn't, because of his own hatred, deprive his son of the happiness and affection he had just begun to build in a new environment. Ned was his weakness, and Mary, the woman he hated to the core, at this moment seemed to be wearing the strongest armor, handed to her by his son himself. George waved his hand irritably. Got it. Hurry up and go to school, you're going to be late. Seeing that he no longer objected, Ned immediately stopped crying and smiled, carrying his little backpack, happily running into the schoolyard. George watched his son's back, took out his phone, and dialed the number of the friend from yesterday. Have you found out anything? George, this is a bit strange. The friend on the other end of the phone sounded somewhat serious. This Mary suddenly disappeared from our city 5 years ago. I checked her exit records, transportation records, nothing. It's as if she vanished into thin air. George's brow furrowed even tighter. So what about these 5 years? Where was she? 5 years later, she reappeared out of nowhere. Her resume says she taught for 4 years at a remote mountain elementary school in a neighboring province. Then she passed our city's teacher recruitment exam and was assigned to Ned's school. The friend paused, then continued. Her file is suspiciously clean. Apart from that, nothing can be found. It's as if someone deliberately erased all traces of her during those 5 years. Deliberately erased? A bad premonition arose in George's heart. Could it be that she had someone backing her? Wasn't that money from back then taken by more than just her? Just as his mind was racing, his phone suddenly rang. A strange number was flashing on the screen. George hesitated for a moment, then answered. Hello, hi. Hello. May I ask if this is Ned's father? On the other end of the line came a gentle female voice, the last thing he wanted to hear at that moment. It's Mary. George's breath caught instantly. I am. His voice was cold enough to drop ice shards. Here's the situation, Mr. George. Mary's tone sounded businesslike and impeccable. Ned accidentally cut his hand with a craft knife during art class today. The wound isn't deep, and I've already taken him to the infirmary for treatment. But according to school policy, in cases like this, parents still need to be notified. Would it be convenient for you to come over now? George's temper flared up in an instant. His son got hurt right under her watch. He almost instinctively wanted to ask her, how can you be a teacher? But the words caught in his throat, and he swallowed them back hard. He couldn't. Right now, he was just an ordinary student's parent. He had to stay calm and restrained. I'll be there soon. He coldly threw out those 4 words, hung up the phone, stepped on the gas, and sped off in the direction of the school. He told himself that he was just there to check on his son's injury. It had nothing to do with that woman. But his uncontrollable, increasingly rapid heartbeat silently mocked his self-deception. When George rushed into the school infirmary, Ned was sitting on a chair with a cute cartoon band-aid on the index finger of his left hand. Mary was half squatting in front of him, holding a lollipop, gently coaxing him. Ned is really brave. Once you put on a band-aid, it doesn't hurt anymore. Yeah, I'm Ultraman. I'm not afraid of pain. Ned held up his injured finger, looking proud. The scene was so warm and tender, like a painting. If the woman in the painting wasn't Mary. Ned, George strode over quickly, pulling his son behind him and anxiously checking his fingers. Where are you hurt? Is it serious? Dad, I'm fine. I just accidentally got a little scratch. Ned wiggled the bandage on his finger, showing it off proudly. Look, Teacher Mary even gave me a lollipop as a reward. Only then did George's gaze fall on Mary. She stood up, a trace of apology on her face. I'm sorry, Mr. George, it was my negligence. The children were all doing crafts at the time, and I didn't watch over them properly for a moment. Her demeanor was very humble, the way a responsible and remorseful teacher should be. George's fury felt like it was hitting a mass of cotton, with nowhere to vent. What could he say? Can he say, you, the woman who took my dad's life-saving money 5 years ago, how do you still have the nerve to stand here and say the words dereliction of duty to me? He can't. He can only suppress all his emotions. From now on, please take good care of him. He squeezed out a few words through his clenched teeth. I will. Mary nodded. The atmosphere was awkward and oppressive. At this moment, the teacher from the infirmary came over, smiling to ease the tension. Oh, Mr. George, don't worry. Kids will have bumps and bruises. It's normal. Teacher Mary immediately brought the child over and handled it promptly. George said nothing, just held Ned's hand and turned to leave. Mr. George, please wait a moment. Mary suddenly called out to him. George stopped walking but didn't turn around. About Ned. Mary's tone was a bit hesitant. I have some matters I'd like to discuss with you privately. When would be convenient for you? Discuss privately? George sneered. What trick was she trying to play this time? No time. He refused coldly. It's about the child's psychological issues. Mary's voice was soft but firm. I think it's very important. George's steps came to a halt. As long as it involved Ned, he couldn't refuse. He turned around and looked at her, his eyes showing an unhidden warning. Say it right here. Mary glanced at the school nurse and Ned beside her, then shook her head. It's not convenient here. She met George's gaze and said calmly, if you really care about the child, please give me 10 minutes. I'll wait for you at the cafe across from the school. After speaking, she no longer looked at George. Turning around, she gave Ned a gentle smile. Ned, you go back with Dad first. Tomorrow at school, the teacher will check your wound again. Then, she walked straight out of the infirmary. George stood in place, his face so dark it seemed it could drip water. This woman, she actually dared to threaten him? Using his son to threaten him? Fine. Very fine. George wanted to see exactly what she was up to. He wanted to see what this woman, who had disappeared for 5 years and suddenly reappeared, was really up to. He handed Ned over to the friend who had arrived upon hearing the news, asking him to take the child home first. Then, he turned around and strode briskly toward the cafe opposite the school. That pace didn't look like he was going to a date. It looked more like he was heading to a banquet of treachery that had been awaited for 5 years. Soft light music played in the cafe. Mary chose a corner seat by the window, with a cup of black coffee without sugar in front of her. George walked over, sat heavily opposite her, the loud noise drawing the attention of people at the neighboring table. He didn't order anything, just looked at her with a scrutinizing, cold gaze. Speak. He got straight to the point, without a single unnecessary word. What exactly do you want? Mary felt a bit uncomfortable under his gaze. She instinctively stirred the coffee in front of her, avoiding his eyes. I came to see you just to talk about Ned's situation. Her voice still sounded businesslike. From my observations over the past few days, I found that although Ned appears lively and cheerful on the surface, his drawings are always filled with a sense of loneliness. His paintings are rich in color and show great imagination. But the home he draws always has only one adult and one child. The Ultraman he draws is always fighting alone, with no companions around. Moreover, I noticed that he especially craves the attention of female elders. He will subconsciously act spoiled towards me or other female teachers at school, seeking hugs. Mr. George, Mary finally looked up, mustering the courage to face him. I know it's been hard raising him alone, and you've sacrificed a lot. But some things cannot be replaced by a father's love. Have you ever thought about finding him a mother? Listening to her clear and well-reasoned professional analysis, George felt nothing but deep irony. A woman who abandoned him and indirectly caused his father's death is now sitting here, as a responsible teacher, righteously discussing his son's mental health issues with him? Is there anything more ridiculous than this? Teacher Mary, George interrupted her, a cruel smile curling at the corner of his mouth. You needn't trouble yourself with my son's psychological problems. After all, aren't you the main culprit behind why he turned out this way? Mary's face instantly went pale again. I'm very curious. George leaned forward, aggressively staring into her eyes. How did you, back then, take that 300,000 and feel justified running off to the mountain valley to play the saint for other children? Or do you think that bringing love and hope to those mountain kids can wash away the sin of your turning a blind eye to death back then? Each of his words was like a poisoned knife, stabbing fiercely into Mary's heart. Mary's lips trembled. She wanted to retort, but couldn't utter a single word. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she stubbornly forced them back. George, she took a deep breath, her voice carrying a trace of undeniable tremor. What happened back then? I was the one who wronged you. I have nothing to say. But this has nothing to do with Ned. He's a good kid, and he deserves the best. I'm here today, just as his teacher, hoping you can face his issues. I've said all I needed to. She stood up, took some change from her wallet, and placed it on the table. I still have class, I have to go. After saying that, she hurriedly left the cafe as if escaping. George watched her hurried departure, but in his heart, there was no trace of satisfaction from revenge. Instead, there was a more restless, indescribable feeling. His gaze inadvertently fell on the spot where Mary had just been sitting. She left in a hurry, her wallet left unclosed. A neatly folded, slightly yellowed note slipped out from the wallet's compartment and fell to the ground. George, as if compelled by some unseen force, bent down and picked it up. It was a notice for hospital bill payment, dated 5 years ago. The name on it was not his father's, but a strange, female name, Linda. And the astronomical medical bill on the notice, along with the glaring red-stamped words "critical condition" below, made George's pupils suddenly contract sharply. He seemed to have suddenly understood something. It also seemed even more confusing. That payment reminder felt like a thorn piercing George's heart. Linda. He remembered this name. She was Mary's mother. 5 years ago, he only knew that Mary came from a single-parent family and lived with her mother. As for her mother's health condition, he had never cared. At that time, he was blinded by love. In his world, there was only himself and Mary, with no room for anything else. Could it be? A thought he dared not ponder flashed through his mind. No, impossible. George shook his head, trying to shake off that absurd thought. Coincidence. It must be a coincidence. He refolded the overdue notice, put it back into Mary's wallet, then called the waiter over and handed the wallet to her, asking her to return it to its owner. He told himself not to think about it anymore. Anything about that woman was none of his business. But in the following days, he unexpectedly began to suffer from insomnia. Repeatedly appearing in his mind were Mary's pale face, holding back tears, and the glaring words "critical condition" on the payment notice. He became increasingly irritable. This irritability reached its peak on the day the school held the parent-child sports meeting. According to the rules, each family must have one parent accompany the child. George braced himself and went. He looked at the other children, all surrounded by their dads and moms, families happily together. But Ned was alone. Ned seemed to notice this too, his mood somewhat downcast. Just then, Mary walked over. Today she wasn't wearing a dress, but had changed into a sporty outfit that was easy to move in. Her long hair was tied up in a high ponytail, looking youthful and vibrant, just like a college student who hadn't graduated yet. Ned, why the long face? She squatted down and asked with a smile. Teacher Mary. Ned pointed to a family of 3 nearby. They all have a mom. Mary's smile stiffened for a moment. Then, she smiled again and patted Ned's head. Then, today, the teacher will be your temporary mom and accompany you and Dad to the competition, okay? Ned's eyes instantly lit up. He looked back at George with a gaze full of anticipation. What could George say? Could he refuse in front of the whole class and the parents? He could only squeeze out one word through clenched teeth. Okay. So, for the entire day that followed, George found himself in an extremely strange and agonizing situation. In the 3-legged race event, he was forced to be tied together with Mary. He could clearly smell the faint scent of shampoo from her hair, a scent he once knew so well. He could feel the warmth of her body through the thin fabric. He was stiff all over, each step taken as if dancing on the tip of a knife. In the parent-child basketball shooting event, he was responsible for shooting, while Mary and Ned cheered for him from the side. "Go, Dad! Go, Dad! Mr. George, go!" Those two shouts of "come on," one loud and one small, intertwined, making him momentarily dazed. It was as if they really were a complete family of three. After a whole day, George was physically and mentally exhausted. But Ned was happier than ever. Holding the medal their family of three had won, he smiled from ear to ear. The sports day ended, and the parents gradually left with their children. George was about to leave with Ned when Mary called out to him. "Mr. George, you left your coat." She was holding his suit jacket in her hand. George took it and said thank you in a stiff tone. Mary looked at him, hesitated for a moment, but couldn't help asking softly, "Do you still hate me?" Her voice was very soft, like a feather, yet it fell heavily on George's heart. George was silent. Hate. Of course, there was hatred. But when he saw that overdue notice, when he saw her current difficult life, when he saw the unmasked, gentle look in her eyes directed at Ned, that hatred seemed to no longer be so pure. It became complex, contradictory, and even mixed with a hint of wavering that he himself was unwilling to admit. "Is this important?" he finally asked back coldly. "It doesn't matter anymore." Mary laughed bitterly at herself, the smile unable to hide her bitterness. "I just don't want Ned to be unhappy because of me. He's a good kid." After saying that, she turned and walked toward the bus stop. George looked at her slender, slightly lonely back, stretched long and long in the afterglow of the sunset. He suddenly realized that he seemed to have never truly understood this woman he once thought he loved to the bone. After the parent-child sports day, a subtle balance settled between George and Mary. They were still enemies, but because of Ned as a bond, they had to maintain the minimum polite and distant communication. George's friend, regarding the investigation into Mary, also hit a dead end. Apart from that mountain area teaching support, resume, the past 5 years of her life seemed like a deliberately protected black box, completely airtight. This made George feel increasingly uneasy. The turning point happened on a rainy night. That day, George went to pick up Ned from school. Because he had an urgent video meeting, he told Ned to wait for him in Mary's office for a while. By the time he finished the meeting and rushed to the school, it was already dark, and outside, a heavy downpour had started. He walked into Mary's office and saw Ned, who was lying on the desk, sound asleep. Mary was sitting nearby, using the desk lamp to grade papers. Hearing the noise, Mary looked up and made a shoo gesture to him. "He just fell asleep," she said softly. George walked over, took off his coat, and gently draped it over his son. He looked at Mary. Under the light, her profile appeared especially soft. On her face was a trace of fatigue that she couldn't hide. "Thank you," he said quietly. These two words were spoken with some difficulty. "It's nothing," Mary smiled. "He's very well behaved." George picked up the sleeping Ned, ready to leave. "The rain is too heavy. I'll give you a ride." Mary picked up the car keys from the table. Only then did George notice an old-looking woman's wallet on her table. "No need." He declined. "Don't get me wrong," Mary explained. "I'm just afraid the child will catch a cold from the rain. Just drop them off downstairs." George couldn't refuse anymore. On the way to the parking lot, Mary held an umbrella, mostly leaning towards George and Ned's side. Her own shoulder was soon soaked by the rain. George looked at her, his heart filled with mixed emotions. At the garage, George settled Ned in the back seat. Mary stood outside the car, waving to him. "Be careful on the road." George gave a grunt and started the car. As the car pulled out of the parking lot, he looked through the rearview mirror and saw Mary standing in the rain, anxiously rummaging through her bag. Only then did he remember that just now in the office, he seemed to have seen her car keys placed together with her wallet, and her wallet was still left on the office desk. George hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he turned the car around and drove back. He didn't want to have any more involvement with her, but he couldn't leave a woman, especially one who had just helped him, stranded on a stormy night. He returned to the office, and sure enough, that old wallet was still lying quietly on the desk. He picked it up, intending to take it down to her. But just as he turned around, the wallet, dampened by the rain, was a bit slippery. His hand trembled, and the wallet fell to the ground. The contents inside spilled all over the floor. A few coins, an ID card, a bus card, and a thick stack of neatly folded, yellowed receipts. George crouched down to pick them up. When he clearly saw the words on those receipts, his breath instantly stopped. They are all hospital billing statements. There are lab test reports, examination fees, medication costs, and the topmost one boldly reads hemodialysis expense list. On all the documents, the patient's name is the same, Linda. And the dates span from 5 years ago, continuously, up to 3 years ago. At the very bottom of those documents, pressed underneath, was a death certificate. Time of death, 3 years ago, autumn. Cause of death, uremia, multiple organ failure. George's mind went blank with a buzz. He was like a statue, crouching there, holding those cold sheets of paper that recorded a long and desperate battle, unable to move even an inch. 5 years ago, uremia, hemodialysis, the missing 300,000 betrothal gift. All the clues, at this moment, connected together, forming a cruel truth he had never imagined. It turned out that when his father was critically ill, his company went bankrupt, and he fell into the darkest valley of his life. She, Mary, was also going through the same, or even more desperate, hell. George didn't know how he ended up returning the wallet to Mary. He also didn't know how he drove back home. He only remembered Mary's face turning pale and colorless the moment she saw the receipts in his hand, and her voice trembling with tears as she almost begged, "Don't look." He parked the car downstairs and didn't go up. He sat in the car all night. Outside the window, heavy rain poured down, just like his heart at this moment, completely shattered by regret and shock. The truth was like the sharpest blade, tempered with ice, slicing through the hatred that had sustained him for the past 5 years, exposing the ridiculous and tragic core within. He had hated for 5 years. He thought it was her who dealt him the most fatal blow when he was at his most difficult. He thought she was greedy, selfish, cold, and heartless. But he was wrong. So wrong, it was ridiculous. The next day, George, with bloodshot eyes, found his friend who worked at the hospital. He told him Linda's name. "Help me check all her hospitalization records from 5 years ago." His voice was hoarse, unlike himself. His friend was very efficient. In the afternoon, a detailed electronic medical record was sent to George's email. George opened the attachment, and every word felt like a red-hot branding iron, searing deeply into his heart. 5 years ago, almost at the same time his father was diagnosed with leukemia, Mary's mother Linda was diagnosed with acute uremia. The only treatment option was long-term hemodialysis, followed by waiting for a suitable kidney donor for transplantation. The cost of dialysis, the cost of the kidney source, the cost of post-operative anti-rejection drugs. For an ordinary family, these are astronomical figures that are simply unaffordable. The medical records clearly document everything. Mary, alone, signed all the surgical consent forms. Mary, alone, signed her name again and again on the critical condition notices. Mary, alone, stayed by her mother's sickbed through countless sleepless nights. And the $30,000 bride price given by the George family was almost immediately paid in full to the hospital's account. But that was only a drop in the bucket. After spending all the money and borrowing from every relative she could, Mary ultimately still couldn't save her mother. 2 years later, Linda passed away in pain. And Mary also took on a heavy debt, one that she would never be able to repay. At the end of the email, there was a photo attached. It was a screenshot taken by a friend from the hospital's surveillance footage. In the photo, a frail girl was crouching in the corner of the hospital payment hall, holding her head, crying her heart out, trembling all over. That girl was Mary. George looked at the photo, at her desperate, helpless back, feeling as if his heart was being crushed alive by a hand. It turned out that, at his most painful and desperate moment, she was in more pain, more despair, than he was. He thought she was a deserter, a traitor. But he didn't know that she was just a person who chose to go to another, even more brutal, battlefield. She did not explain. She didn't even ask for help. She just, all alone, silently bore everything. Why? Why didn't she tell him? George couldn't understand. Then, he remembered himself 5 years ago. The self who was blinded by hatred and despair. If back then, she had told him that her mother was also ill and needed money, what would he have done? Would he think that she is just making excuses for her own greed? Would he, in his own desperate situation, be completely unable to hear about her desperation? Yes, he would. He would. George closed his eyes in pain. It was him, his ignorance and arrogance back then, his sense of entitlement, his never truly caring about or understanding her family, her situation, that led to today's irreparable situation. He had hated her for 5 years. In the end, he realized. The one he should hate the most was himself. 5 years ago, incompetent, ignorant, and arrogantly self-righteous. He was the true sinner. The truth, like a tsunami 5 years late, completely engulfed George. He locked himself in the study for 2 whole days and nights. No eating, no drinking, no sleeping. He repeatedly looked at that cold medical record, at the photo of Mary breaking down, and crying in the corner of the hospital. His heart was repeatedly scorched by the flames of regret, burned into a charred ruin. He remembered the note Mary left before she left back then. "George, I'm sorry, I don't want to live like this." At the time, he thought her so-called "like this" referred to living with him in poverty and debt. But now he finally understood. What she meant was those days when you helplessly watch your closest family member struggle in pain on their sickbed, unable to do anything, surviving only by the charity of others, living without dignity or hope. It's not that she didn't want to share the hardships with him. She just didn't want him to see her at her most miserable, most vulnerable, and most desperate. She chose to bear all the pain and debts alone, completely disappearing from his world. She thought this was the final and most dignified farewell to the relationship between them. How cruel, and how foolish. George slapped himself hard. The crisp sound was especially harsh in the silent study. What exactly had he done? In these 5 years, he had cursed her countless times in his heart with the most venomous words. After their reunion, he used the coldest attitude and the most hurtful words to push her deeper and deeper into the abyss, again and again. He even, arrogantly, went to investigate her, to doubt her. He took her sacrifice as a betrayal. He took her pain as evidence of guilt. He was a thorough, hopeless bastard. On the third day, George finally stepped out of the study. He shaved, changed into clean clothes, and looked like a soulless shell, a walking corpse. The first thing he did was go to the bank and withdraw all the available liquid funds from his company's account. A full $3 million. He put the cash into a black travel bag, then drove to the old neighborhood where Mary lived. He didn't know why he was doing this. To make amends? To atone? He knew that all of this was too late and too ridiculous. He just wanted to find an outlet for his heart, which had been gnawed to pieces by regret. He parked the car downstairs and didn't go up. He stayed quietly in the car, waiting, from dawn until dusk. Finally, he saw that familiar figure. Mary was carrying a bag of groceries, walking slowly from a distance. She looked more haggard than she had a few days ago. George opened the car door and got out. He carried the heavy travel bag, step by step, walking up to her. Mary was stunned when she saw him. "You?" George said nothing. He simply placed the travel bag at her feet, then unzipped it. A whole bag of red, brand new banknotes was exposed to the air. Mary's pupils suddenly contracted. She instinctively took a step back, as if looking at some terrifying beast. "George, what do you mean by this?" Her voice carried a hint of fear and trembling. "Here, this is $3 million. George looked at her, his eyes filled with endless pain and exhaustion. "I know, none of this can make up for anything. My dad's life can't come back. Your mom can't come back either. The 5 years between us can't come back either. I just wanted to tell you." His voice choked. This man, decisive and ruthless in the business world, who had never shown the slightest weakness, was now fragile like a child in front of the woman he had deeply hurt. "I'm sorry." He bent down deeply, 90 degrees. "Mary, I'm sorry." Mary looked at him, looked at that head of his, once so proud, now humbled to the dust. She looked at the bag on the ground, money that was full of irony to her. Tears finally broke the dam. She didn't go to help him. Nor did she look at the bag of money. She just shook her head, repeating the same sentence over and over. "Too late. George, it's all too late." After speaking, she walked around him, carrying the bag of groceries that no longer mattered, like a soulless puppet, step by step, into that old, dark, dilapidated apartment building, leaving George alone, with that bag of cold money, completely swallowed by boundless regret in the gradually falling night. George's apology and the $3 million were like a huge stone thrown into the already stagnant lake at the heart of Mary, stirring up towering waves. She refused the money. The next day, George found that the black travel bag was placed intact at the reception desk of his company. She used this most direct and resolute way to tell him that their relationship could not be settled with money. George sank into even deeper pain. He began to appear in Mary's life in a manner almost like stalking. In the early morning, he would quietly leave a steaming hot breakfast downstairs at her home. Late at night, when he saw the lights still on in her office, he would anonymously order a late-night snack for her overtime work. He found out that she had been supporting a poor student in a mountainous area. So, in the name of that student, he donated a library to the mountain primary school where she worked. Everything he did was done cautiously, not daring to let her know. He was like a humble sinner who had made a mistake, trying in this clumsy way to gradually atone for the sins he had committed. Mary seemed to sense something as well, but she chose to remain silent. She neither accepted nor rejected. The two of them maintained a very strange, ambiguous balance. The one who broke this balance was Ned. The world of children is the purest and also the most sensitive. He realized that his dad had changed. Dad no longer forced him to stay away from Teacher Mary. Dad would often stare blankly at Teacher Mary's photo. Dad would even secretly go downstairs to Teacher Mary's building after he fell asleep and watch for a long, long time. One day, Ned was drawing at home. He drew a picture. In the picture, there was a tall man, a gentle woman, and a small boy holding hands, walking in the park. He took the drawing and ran to George, who was handling work in the study. Dad, look, I drew this. George put down the documents in his hand and took the painting. When he saw the face of the woman in the painting, his heart was struck hard. The woman in the painting had gentle long hair and a pair of smiling eyes. It was Mary. Ned, you. Dad. Ned looked up at him, asking in an incredibly serious yet slightly cautious tone. Teacher Mary, is she my mom? Children's words are innocent but can be the sharpest sword, instantly piercing through all of George's disguises and evasions. George looked into his son's clear, hopeful eyes, opened his mouth, but not a single word came out. How should he answer? How should he explain to a 5-year-old child that the mom, in his drawing almost, really almost, became his mom? And how should he explain that it was his dad's ignorance and stupidity that caused this mom to be lost? Dad, Ned tugged at his sleeve when he saw him silent. All my classmates say that the way Teacher Mary looks at me is exactly the same as the way their moms look at them. They also said that Teacher Mary and I look a bit alike. George's heart ached so much that he could hardly breathe. He crouched down and held his son tightly in his arms. Ned, his voice hoarse, I'm sorry. It's Dad's fault. It was Dad who lost Mom. For the first time, he admitted his failure in front of his son. Also for the first time, he made a firm decision in his heart that no matter how difficult it would be, he would never turn back. He was going to win her back. No, it's not chasing. It's begging. Begging her to come back. Begging her to give him one more chance. Beg her, let him, return to him that complete family that should have belonged to Ned. George decided to confess everything to Mary. He was going to tell her that he already knew the whole truth. He wanted her to know how much he regretted, how much he hated, and also how much he missed her over these 5 years. He made an appointment with Mary. He used Ned's name. He said Ned had a very important gift that he wanted to give her personally. Mary did not refuse. The meeting place was the small dessert shop they frequented most during their university days. George arrived early. He didn't sit down, just stood at the door, waiting. When Mary's figure appeared around the corner, his heart uncontrollably started pounding wildly. Today, she was wearing a white dress, exactly the same as the first time he saw her in his memory. Time seemed to overlap at this very moment. Where's Ned? Mary walked up to him and asked. He has something to do. He'll be late. George lied, his voice a bit dry. Let's go in and wait for him first. Mary didn't doubt him and nodded. The two sat facing each other. The atmosphere remained awkward and silent. What would you like to drink? George took the initiative to ask. Same as you is fine, Mary said softly. George's heart ached again. He remembered, she never used to drink coffee. She said she liked sweet things, milk, juice. It was the bitterness of these 5 years that turned her into an adult accustomed to bitterness. George ordered 2 cups of black coffee. He looked at her face, which appeared excessively thin due to years of hard work and malnutrition. 1,000 words were stuck in his throat, but he didn't know where to begin. In the end, he simply pushed a bank card gently in front of her. There's 500,000 in here, he said softly. I know that back then, you owed a lot of money to treat your mother's illness. Take this first and pay off the debt. Mary's expression changed instantly. She jumped up suddenly, like a cat that had its tail stepped on. George, what do you mean? Her voice sharpened with agitation. Are you investigating me? You think that just because you found out these things, you can use money to make up for it, to throw at me? Her eyes were bloodshot as she looked at him, her gaze filled with deep, wounded humiliation. I'm telling you, Mary, would rather beg than ever take another penny from your George family. No, Mary, listen to me. George was also desperate. He stood up and tried to grab her hand. Don't touch me. Mary, startled, suddenly shook him off. The coffee cup was knocked to the ground by her movement. The scalding coffee spilled all over her hand. She cried out softly in pain. Mary, without a second thought, George grabbed her hand and rushed toward the nearby pool. He turned on the faucet and rinsed her rapidly reddening hand with the cold tap water. His movements were so natural and effortless, as if they had never been apart. Mary was stunned. She looked at him, at his nervous, caring, genuine eyes, and the hard, cold defense line in her heart finally began to show a crack. "George," her voice softened. "I'm sorry." George held her hand, not letting go. He looked into her eyes and said word by word, "Mary, I know everything. About your mother, about the 300,000, everything over these 5 years, I have known it all. I'm sorry, I was the jerk. It was me who wrongly blamed you for 5 years. I'm sorry, it was me who, when you needed me the most, only thought about my own pain. I'm sorry He hadn't finished speaking. Mary's tears could no longer be controlled and surged out uncontrollably. All her strength, all her disguises, all her grievances and pain were completely shattered at this moment by his 5-year late words. "I knew everything." She crouched down, holding her head, and cried out loud like a child. Crying, heartbroken. George looked at her, his heart aching as if it were being torn apart. He did not try to persuade her. He knew she needed to vent. She cried out all the pain of these 5 years, and then it was all right. He just quietly stayed by her side, until she cried so much that she could no longer make a sound. Only then did he walk over, take off his coat, and gently drape it over her shoulders, which were trembling slightly from crying. "Mary," he crouched down to her level, his eyes filled with an unprecedented firmness and tenderness. "It was me who lost you before. From now on, let me find you, little by little. Is that okay?" That day, in the small dessert shop, Mary cried away 5 years' worth of tears. She neither agreed to George nor refused. She simply tacitly accepted as he began to re-enter her life in a brand new, clumsy, yet incredibly determined manner. George started what could be called a textbook-level, chasing wife funeral pyre. He no longer used money, the most brutal and hurtful method. What he used were time and actions. Every day, without fail, he personally picked Ned up and dropped him off at school. Then, under the pretext of discussing the child's situation with the teacher, he would linger in Mary's office for a long time. He would listen attentively to Mary, like a real student's parent, as she talked about Ned's various behaviors at school. Then, seemingly casually, he would bring up some bits and pieces from their past. "Teacher Mary, Ned has this picky eating habit. I don't know who he learned it from. I remember you used to dislike eating carrots too. Teacher Mary, look, does this kitten that Ned drew look like the Tangyuan you used to have?" Every time, Mary just listened silently without responding. But the slight redness on her earlobes betrayed her, revealing a heart that was far from calm. George figured out Mary's off-work time. He would appear downstairs in her residential complex, punctually every day. He didn't drive. He just stood quietly under the streetlight, waiting. When Mary came home from work and saw him, she would always frown and say, "You should go back. I don't need you." George didn't insist either. He just smiled and said, "I'm not waiting for you. I just think the streetlight here is brighter than the one at my home." Then, he would watch her go upstairs until the light in her room turned on. Only then would he turn around and leave, come rain or shine. Mary verbally told him to leave, but every day after work, she would subconsciously look in the direction of that streetlight. When she saw that familiar figure, her heart, tired from the whole day, would inexplicably calm down. George also took charge of Mary's 3 meals a day. He hired a top nutritionist specifically to take care of Mary's health. Then, he had the housekeeper prepare a variety of meals every day, packed them in insulated containers, and delivered them to the school on time. He didn't dare to deliver them himself, so he had Ned act as the little courier. "Teacher Mary, this is a loving lunch my dad specially made for you," Ned would loudly announce every time. This caused the other teachers in the office to cheer and make a fuss. Every time, Mary felt both embarrassed and angry, wanting to refuse, but she couldn't resist Ned's big, hopeful eyes. She could only silently eat those dishes, filled with his flavor, under the ambiguous gazes of her colleagues. Her stomach was gradually warmed by him, little by little. Her heart also seemed to be slowly warmed by him, bit by bit. George even used his connections to find those thugs who had forced Mary to sign the usurious loan contract back then. He did not use violence. He simply collected all the evidence of their illegal activities over the years and handed it over to the police. He sought justice for her, albeit belatedly. Also for her, he cleared away all potential dangers in life. Mary saw everything he did. She knew he was trying. He was using every way he had to make amends and atone. But can that scar really be easily smoothed over? 5 years of estrangement, 5 years of pain, can they really be treated as if they never happened? She didn't know. She only knew that her heart, long frozen, was uncontrollably melting little by little for him. She began to smile at him. She began to keep a light on for him when he waited downstairs, a light to guide him home. She began to send Ned a message when she ate the food he brought. Tell your dad, today's soup is really good. George knew he was one step closer to success. The 5 years he owed her, he was slowly repaying with every day of his remaining life. Just when George thought that his life with Mary would slowly get back on track amidst a gentle tug of affection, an accident, however, was like a bucket of cold water, shattering all his illusions. Mary was in trouble. The old residential building she rented caught fire due to aging electrical wiring. When George received the news and rushed to the scene like a madman, the entire building was already completely engulfed in raging flames. He watched the towering firelight and felt as if his soul had left his body. History, unbelievably, was repeating itself in such a cruel way. 5 years ago, he lost his father because he had no money. 5 years later, was he really going to lose her again because of a fire? No, he absolutely would not allow it. Without a second thought, George wanted to rush into the fire. Sir, you can't go in. It's too dangerous. The firefighter held him tightly. Let go of me. My wife is still inside. George's eyes were bloodshot, roaring like a trapped wild beast. At that moment, a neighbor with a face blackened by smoke was helped out by the firefighters. Teacher Mary went back in to save my child, and went back in again. George's brain went buzz, completely exploding. That stupid woman. The stupidest woman in the whole world. She herself had crawled out of hell. So why did she keep recklessly diving back in, again and again, to fight through hell for others? George no longer cared about any reason. He shoved aside the firefighter blocking him, like a bullet, resolutely charging into that sea of fire that could devour everything. Thick smoke and fierce flames scorched his skin. Collapsed, burning obstacles blocked his way. He didn't care about anything else. In his heart, there was only one thought. Find her. Take her away. Finally, at the staircase on the second floor, he found Mary, who was almost unconscious from the thick smoke, and the little boy from the neighbor's house whom she was fiercely protecting with her body. Mary. George rushed over and held her tightly in his arms. Mary, half conscious, saw him and thought it was a hallucination. Why are you here quickly? Take the child away. If we're leaving, we leave together. George picked her up along with the child, turned around, and rushed out. At that moment, a huge, burning ceiling panel came crashing straight down from above their heads. George's pupils suddenly contracted sharply. He didn't have time to think further. Almost instinctively, he shoved Mary and the child out forcefully. As for himself, he was brutally struck on the back by that huge slab, his entire body pinned underneath. George. Mary let out a heart-wrenching, piercing scream. In the hospital, George, thanks to timely rescue, was out of life-threatening danger. But his back was severely crushed, leaving a large area of grim burns and wounds. Mary stayed by his bedside, looking at his back, torn and bloody, tears streaming like broken beads, unable to stop. When the doctor came to change the dressing, he untied the gauze on his back. Mary was shocked to see that next to the new, terrifying wound, there was also an old scar that had already healed. That scar, in position and shape, was almost exactly the same as this new injury. This is, Mary trembled, pointing at the old scar, and asked the doctor. The doctor glanced at it and said, Oh, this? It's an old injury. Judging by its appearance, it's at least 5 years old. It seems it was caused by a heavy object hitting it before. Surviving that was really lucky. 5 years. Injured by a heavy object. Mary's brain felt as if it had been struck hard by something. She remembered. 5 years ago, there was also a small fire in the building where she lived. At that time, she was trapped inside while trying to save a photo of her and her mother. A young firefighter, whose face she couldn't clearly see, rushed in and saved her. At that time, a piece of the ceiling also fell down. That firefighter, just like today, without hesitation, used his back to shield her. She only remembered that the firefighter was tall and thin. At that moment, she was only focused on her own sadness and despair. She even forgot to say a single thank you. She never knew. That person, who had once saved her life 5 years ago, was actually George. It turned out that their fate had been deeply engraved long before she betrayed him. It turned out that what he owed her, and what she owed him, had long since become indistinguishable. When George woke up from his coma, the first thing he saw was Mary's eyes, red and swollen, like a rabbit's. You're awake. She looked at him, her voice hoarse and thick with a strong nasal tone. George wanted to smile at her, but the pain from the wound on his back made him grit his teeth. Are you stupid or what? Mary looked at him like that, tears falling again. Who told you to rush in? Are you trying to get yourself killed? My life. George looked at her, his gaze more tender than ever before. I gave it to you 5 years ago. Mary's heart was scorched by his words, in utter chaos. She reached out her hand and gently touched the bandaged back of his body. 5 years ago, the person who saved me was you, wasn't it? She asked, choking up. George was stunned for a moment, then smiled bitterly and nodded. How did you know? I saw it, that scar. Mary's tears fell onto the back of his hand. George, why have you never told me? Told you what? George laughed bitterly. Told you I saved you, so you shouldn't have left me? Mary, back then, I was powerless. I was powerless to come up with money when my dad needed it. I was powerless to help you when your mom needed money. I didn't even know that you were struggling so much at that time. What right do I have to use that little favor to morally coerce you? The one who should say sorry is me. Mary, listening to his words, could no longer hold back and threw herself into his arms, crying out loud. All the misunderstandings, all the barriers, all the pain and grievances, at this moment, turned into burning tears. They were all once victims of fate. They also all once hurt each other in the clumsiest ways. Fortunately, there is still time for everything. 1 month later, George was discharged from the hospital. The first thing he did was to take Mary to the Civil Affairs Bureau. He didn't say anything. He just handed her the household registration book. Mary looked at him, at his face still marked with scars, but full of determination and love, and smiled through her tears. She nodded. After leaving the Civil Affairs Bureau, George pulled her along to the mall. He walked into a jewelry store he had already set his eyes on long ago. He took out from his pocket a small velvet box that he had treasured for 5 years and hadn't even dared to throw away during a fire. He opened the box, and inside lay a simple, yet still shining platinum ring. He looked at her, and, under the gaze of everyone in the mall, slowly knelt down on one knee. Mary, his voice was hoarse but incredibly clear. 5 years ago, I couldn't put this ring on your finger myself. Today, are you still willing to give me this chance? Are you still willing to marry this bastard, fool, but who swears to spend the rest of his life loving you and making it up to you, George? Mary looked at him, already crying uncontrollably. She reached out her hand and nodded firmly. I do. George smiled. He carefully, slowly slipped the ring that was 5 years late onto her ring finger, perfectly fitting, as if it was born to belong there. Half a year later, the school held another parent-teacher meeting. This time, George and Mary, hand in hand, sat together in the classroom. When Mary stood up to introduce herself as a family member rather than the head teacher, the other parents all showed expressions of surprise and understanding. Hello everyone, I am Ned's mother, Mary. She smiled, looking at George beside her, and at the adorable son in the audience who was waving vigorously at her. Sunlight poured in through the window, warm and bright. So good. That stranger on the podium, who made her feel hopeless, finally became the lover she could see whenever she turned around. And this time, there were no more misunderstandings or mischances between them. Only the rest of life, long-lasting, mutual support and companionship.